And I think that I was born into a Catholic family, and I really am. I have strong Christian convictions.
The encounter between Africa's youngest revolutionary leader and Hollywood's most controversial Christian director would go down as one of the most watched TV interviews ever. This is the tale of how Mel Gibson was moved to tears on live television by Ibrahim Traoré's remarks regarding Jesus Christ. It was intended to be a standard interview for a promotion. In order to talk about his next projects and his ongoing research into faith-based film, Mel Gibson, the Academy Award-winning filmmaker of The Passion of the Christ, had consented to come on Global Perspectives, a primetime international affairs program. But something unexpected had been arranged by the show's producers. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a 34-year-old military officer who had seized control in a coup 2 years earlier, will attend the discussion via satellite link to Burkina Faso. There was nothing more stunning than the difference. The 68-year-old Australian-American filmmaker and actor Gibson sat in a luxurious Los Angeles studio, his visage etched with the effects of decades in the spotlight. Traoré, meanwhile, wore his trademark military fatigues and made an appearance on screen from a small office in Ouagadougou. His boyish face was composed but solemn. The conversation started off in a typical manner, as host Sarah Chin questioned Gibson about his most recent endeavors and his ongoing dedication to illustrating religious themes in his art. Gibson talked fervently about his Catholic religion and his conviction that spiritual enlightenment may be facilitated by film. With a strong hand gesture, Gibson remarked, "My most meaningful work has always been driven by faith. I didn't consider box office receipts when I was making The Passion of the Christ. I had souls on my mind." After introducing himself as one of Africa's youngest leaders, Chin turned to Traoré and inquired about his outlook on the future of Burkina Faso. Speaking with grace, Traoré discussed sovereignty, overcoming neo-colonial pressures, and his resolve to serve his people honorably. "Power is not about leadership," Traoré stated in a calm and collected tone. "It has to do with service. It has to do with giving up something. I learned these values from my faith rather than political theory." Gibson was the one who led the discussion toward religion, possibly because he felt a connection to this young African leader, who also mentioned religion. Gibson asked a question that would completely alter the interview's tone as he leaned forward in his chair. "I know you're a devout man, Captain Traoré. I've devoted a significant portion of my professional life to studying the life of Jesus Christ. Therefore, I'm interested in your viewpoint. In light of your leadership style and your African vision, how do you interpret the teachings of Christ?" The only sound coming from the studio was the tiny lag caused by the satellite connection. Traoré hesitated. His gaze seemed to go beyond the camera as though drawing from a well of introspection. "Mr. Gibson," Traoré said, his tone shifting to one that was softer, more introspective, but yet possessed an indisputable authority. "I've seen The Passion of the Christ, your movie. It's a strong piece. However, I would like to share with you something about Jesus that your Hollywood might not be able to depict, something that is deeply ingrained in African culture." Gibson sat up straight, obviously interested. Sarah Chin, the host, seemed to feel that something important was going to happen, and said nothing. "You see," Traoré went on, "you have frequently depicted Jesus in the West as this aloof character, this supernatural entity who briefly visited the world, endured exquisite suffering, and then rose to heaven. You concentrate on his deity, his atonement, and his resurrection. All of these are significant and true, but there's more. Something that speaks directly to those of us who have experienced colonization, oppression, and the loss of our dignity." Though not louder, Traoré's voice became more powerful and impassioned. It was a passion of conviction, not fury. "Jesus' birth took place during an occupation. Roman rule. My people were colonized, and so were his people. In the same way that the French took wealth from Burkina Faso, the Romans took wealth from Palestine. Just as I grew up with foreign military bases on my territory, Jesus grew up witnessing foreign soldiers police his streets." Gibson's face started to shift. The self-assured director who had walked into the interview was evolving into someone else. "A listener, a pupil," Traoré went on. "But here's what your Western Christianity sometimes misses. Jesus didn't merely advocate for forgiveness and love in a theoretical sense. He was a rebel who lived with truth and total spiritual freedom, which were far more harmful to the established order than guns or bloodshed." Even over the satellite connection, Traoré's intensity was evident as he drew closer to his camera. Jesus wasn't simply upset about religious corruption when he threw the businessmen out of the temple. He was up against a whole economic structure that took advantage of the underprivileged in the name of God. His statement, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's," did not call for docile deference to power. He was highlighting the limitations of earthly power by drawing a line between it and divine authority. Gibson's gaze was now entirely focused on the television. He was no longer making his normal enthusiastic movements. The cameras caught the earnestness with which he was listening. "Mr. Gibson, you did a fantastic job depicting Jesus' physical anguish in your film. However, allow me to share his spiritual awakening with you. Jesus referred to the religious establishment that worked with Rome, the Pharisees, as vipers. It would be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for them to enter heaven, Jesus stated, referring to the wealthy who mistreated the poor. He died for more than simply our sins. He survived to demonstrate to us that there are alternative options. After a moment of silence, Traoré's voice appeared to pierce the screen with its weight. Mr. Gibson, this is the Jesus that we know in Africa. The Jesus who supports the downtrodden, Jesus who confronts and exposes dishonest authorities, the Jesus who seeks justice on earth in addition to heaven after death, the Jesus who changes society in addition to pardoning sins, you know, Traoré murmured, his tone growing closer. I consider more than just Jesus' crucifixion when I pray. As a young man, perhaps my age, Jesus considers his conquered nation and decides that he would sooner die than continue to live as a slave to injustice. I consider Jesus' decision to proclaim the truth while knowing it would cost him everything after witnessing children go hungry while the privileged feast. Gibson was breathing much more deeply now. Previously clasped in his lap, his hands were now squeezed together as though in prayer. This is the reason I assumed leadership duties, Mr. Gibson. I witnessed my people suffering while foreigners profited from our work, resources, and gold, not because I want power. I witnessed young kids who had no future as their ancestors' wealth was transferred to banks in Paris. Furthermore, I recall that Jesus prayed for more than just change. He was its embodiment. Traoré's voice became even quieter, yet more forceful in some way. If Jesus were here today, Mr. Gibson, do you know what he would say to me? Ibrahim, he would probably say, you have been given much. You've received instruction. Your people have put their trust in you. This historical moment has been granted to you. How are you going to use it? Are you going to serve yourself with it? Or will you use it to encourage your siblings who are the least fortunate? Gibson was starting to lose his cool. Tears were starting to form in his eyes. I think Jesus would tell me the same thing he told his disciples. The greatest among you will be your servant, Traoré went on. Your servant must be the one who aspires to be renowned among you, and the first person must be the slave of all. Traoré's voice became almost prophetic as he leaned back a little. Mr. Gibson, this is what it means to be a leader in the light of Christ. It implies that I ought to consider whether every choice I make would benefit the underprivileged. Does the oppressed benefit from this? Is justice served by this? Because I am not a follower of Jesus if it does not. Caesar is the one I'm following. At this point, Gibson was clearly upset, and tears were starting to fall down his cheeks. Sarah Chin watched in awe as this young African leader's remarks brought one of Hollywood's most well-knownly tough characters to tears. Mr. Gibson, murmured Traoré, as if he could feel the weight of his words. I have something I want you to know. Millions of people were moved by your film, The Passion of the Christ. It demonstrated to the world how much Jesus loved people. With all due respect, however, I would like to encourage you to think about Jesus, who not only died for us but also lived for us. Jesus taught us that justice is necessary for love to be complete, that faith is dead without action. Gibson had lost all professional poise and was now crying in public. Mr. Gibson, you've been given a fantastic platform. Millions of people are listening to you. What if you used that platform to depict Jesus' revolution as well as his suffering? What if you spread the word that being a follower of Christ entails standing with the downtrodden, opposing the strong, and creating a society in which every individual is treated with respect and every child has enough to eat? Gibson was able to speak despite his tears. In stark contrast to the assured tone he had used throughout his career, his voice was full of passion. Gibson used Traoré's first name for the first time when he said, Captain Ibrahim. I believed that I knew Christ. I believed I had the gospel. However, I've been concentrating on the wrong things while I've been listening to you. Pardon me. Traoré's face became more sympathetic. No, my sibling, Traoré said softly. You haven't been concentrating on the incorrect things. You have been concentrating on significant matters. Our faith is centered on the cross, but maybe now is the right moment to pay attention to the teachings that made that cross necessary as well as the lives that led to it. Gibson, utterly indifferent to his appearance on national television, wiped his eyes with his sleeve. You're correct, Gibson muttered. Jesus was more than simply divine. He was a pioneer. Because he insisted that people choose between serving God and serving power, he posed a threat to the status quo. Exactly, Traoré gave a nod. And we still have to make that decision today. We have to make a decision every day. Will we worship the gods of riches and power, or the God of justice and love? The interview went on for 20 more minutes. However, the dynamic was quite different. The seasoned interviewee, Gibson, had turned into the pupil. The young military commander Traoré had taken on the role of instructor. They talked about the duty of Christians in positions of power, liberation theology, and practical theology. Gibson sat for a few moments in startled silence as the interview came to a conclusion. The host, Sarah Chin, was obviously moved herself and found it difficult to make the customary concluding statements. That was remarkable, Chin eventually said. Thank you both, Captain Traoré and Mr. Gibson, for what was undoubtedly one of the most impactful discussions we've ever had on this program. The video went viral on several platforms in the weeks after the interview. The video of Gibson sobbing was watched millions of times. More significantly, though, the entire interview generated discussions in living rooms, colleges, and churches all around the world. Later, Gibson said the interview changed his life. In later interviews, he discussed how Traoré's remarks had made him reevaluate not only his religious beliefs, but also his obligations as a public figure and artist. Weeks later, Gibson remarked, "Ibrahim showed me a Jesus I thought I knew, but somehow missed. He demonstrated to me that the message of Christ goes beyond individual salvation. It has to do with changing society. Building the kingdom of heaven on earth is more important than merely anticipating it in the hereafter." The interview served as yet another forum for Traoré to express his ideas about faith-based and service-oriented leadership. He went on to discuss the relationship between spirituality and social justice, relating the fight for African freedom and dignity to the teachings of Christ. The interview is still a potent illustration of how genuine discussion can change even the most entrenched viewpoints, and how the teachings of Jesus Christ continue to uplift and challenge individuals from all walks of life. It served as a reminder that often the most profound theological ideas originate from the lived experiences of those who, like Jesus, decide to stand with the downtrodden and strive for justice in an unjust world, rather than from academic institutions or film studios.